that you're all here. Looked out the window this morning and thought, nobody will be there. But, you know, I've been humbled by my life at this point, so I figure if nobody is there, I'm still doing what I'm supposed to do, which is giving service to other human beings. If there are 3 people in the room, this has happened to me, by the way, at bookstores. So I wanted to talk about how you write, and this has been a problem for me my whole life. You might not think that a person who's published as many books as I have has been blocked or has suffered from deep depression, but I have. So I've come up with 5 rules for writing in this talk. Number 1, approval. Don't expect approval for telling the truth. And this is really important because if you tell the truth, think of what's happened to other writers in history. Think of Orhan Pamuk going to jail for saying that the Turks committed a Holocaust against the Armenians. He's a lovely man. I know him a bit. I've had dinner with him. But he said something that we know to be true, that the Turks killed a lot of Armenians and it was a Holocaust. And he was sent to jail for that. Think of Dante, who was also exiled from Florence, his beloved city, for saying things that people didn't want to hear. Think of Ovid, exiled from Rome for writing poems. So if you decide to be a writer, be aware that the tradition you're following in is the tradition of banned, burned, murdered for telling the truth, okay? Jailed. So I think that in this country where we have the First Amendment and things like that, we think, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to make $1 million, and life will be a picnic ever after. We are not exceptions to the rule. Telling the truth is never popular, okay? Number 2, expect to reveal yourself when you write. There's no way to write and not reveal yourself. Even if you're a pundit writing about the fall of the Soviet Union, you reveal yourself. No way not to. In fact, when I watch the pundits on TV, and they pretend to be, you know, talking about reportorial things, I can see why they write about the subjects they write about. They're passionate about those subjects, and usually the reason is a deeply personal one. As long as you're revealing language upon the page, you are revealing yourself. There is no way around it. Okay? Number 3, ignore publication gossip. The rules change constantly. You may read a bestseller and think, I can do better than that, and you probably can, by the way. You may read 50 Shades of Grey or 50 Shades of Bullshit or whatever it was called. And you look at the book and you think, my God, nobody even copy edited this. Every time this girl has an orgasm, she says, holy cow, or holy shit. And you look at it and you think, I could do better than that. There's no doubt about it. I could even copy edit better than that. But that doesn't mean that you will write something and instantaneously sell 100 million copies and sex toys as well. I read in the New York Times today that the exclusive sex toys license for the movie is held by a company called Babeland Toys. You may have read the article. What does one make of an article like that in the New York Times as a young writer? I mean, do you say, if I write my erotic novel, they will sell sex toys? I mean, I don't know. When I was a young writer, if I had read an article like that, I would have prepared to jump out the window, right? Now that I'm an older writer, I think, And I go into gales of laughter, but I know that young writers were probably made miserable by that article, the depressive ones, which is pretty much every writer I've ever met. Okay, so publication gossip. You read that Lena Dunham got how many millions of dollars for her book because she's a pretty good writer, actually, an honest writer, and she is funny. But she got many millions, we don't really know how many millions, for her book, and some people get really excited by that, and some people want to kill her, which is also another thing young writers feel. By the time you finish your book, all the trends that you see today will be over. The publishing companies that you see today will have merged with other publishing companies. There will be one big publishing company, and it will be called Random House, Penguin, Macmillan, Weatherby, George Dupree. And who knows what they'll want to publish? A good guess would be movie star memoirs, writers who write the same book all the time, writers who turn out books as if they were sausages, 2 and 3 a year, romance novelists who turn out 4 or 5 books a year. Usually, that's where the money, the dependable money, is. If you want to write a book of your heart, forget all that. It will not help you. By the time your book is finished, all the trends will have changed. And there's no point in trying to psych the market because books take a while to write. They don't come easily. And if you're writing out of your heart, in the blood from your veins, you can't worry about trends. You have to write the truest book you can write. The funniest book you can write if you're funny. The saddest book you can write if you're sad. You cannot worry yourself about the trends because they change constantly. So did I say forget about money? There's another thing to say about money. When I first started to publish as a poet, I got advances for my books that might have paid for 2 dinners at a middling restaurant. And then I went through a period after Fear of Flying, which got a pretty small advance, where they were giving me things with many zeros at the end for my books. Fortunately, I did not spend all the money, but I did invest some of it, in some cases disastrously, and in other cases well, as one does when one doesn't know anything about money. However, I didn't spend it all on Manolo Blahniks or whatever. And I'm really glad because now the advances I get have many fewer zeros, and I finish the whole book before I sell it. I finish the whole book before I sell it because this is the reason, really. If I were to write a précis of the book, I wouldn't be able to write the book. I had an agent once who told me, write me an outline of the book you're going to write. And I wrote any number of outlines. And once I had written those outlines, I didn't want to write the book. I couldn't write the book. I had put all the passion into the outline. So given the way publishing has changed, I would just say, sit down and write the book that's in your heart. Because writing the outlines is a no-win situation. I mean, unless you're writing nonfiction, unless you were there at the fall of the Soviet Union and you have a story to tell about it, or unless you know something about the sheikhs of Saudi Arabia that nobody else knows, which is that they're very intimate with the Bush family, but we all know that. But don't worry about that. Robertson Davies once said, there is no point writing a book unless you must write that book or go mad or perhaps die. I could not say it better myself. The fact is, trying to fabricate a book out of what you think the audience wants, what you think the publisher wants, is a complete no-win. Do what Robertson Davies says. Write the book that unless you write it, you will go mad or perhaps die. When I wrote Fear of Flying, I was a young poet who read and taught poetry at the 92nd Street Y. I was considered a very literary person. I published in Poetry Chicago, and I published in The New Yorker. Actually, I'm going to publish in The New Yorker again, which is amazing to me. But, and I wrote this book that I thought was a very literary book about a young poet who wanted to be more, who was bored with her marriage, who wanted her life to be different. And when I turned it into the hardcover publisher, he said, well, maybe we'll sell 5,000 copies. The book took off in paperback and sold millions of copies. I was more surprised than anybody. There was no way I could have predicted the intersection of the book with the times. You can't predict that. It's like a bolt out of the blue. And I hope that happens to you, but you can't count on it. So write the book you have to write. If you write the book you have to write, if you write it honestly and truly, you may have a very lucky break. It may intersect with the times, and it may still be around 40 years later. I feel very blessed that that happened to me, but it's not something that can be predicted. And my fifth rule for writers is action. Get the reader to turn the page. Why? Because if the reader doesn't turn the page, the reader will never know what you need to tell that reader. So remember that people's attention is not infinite, and they want to be amused and entertained and delighted, as well as informed and changed in their hearts and many other things. So those are my rules for writers. Of course, there are many more. In seducing the demon writing for my life, I give 20 rules for writers. I tried to boil them down to 5 here. So there you go. About expectation, we're all afraid of self-revelation. We're afraid of shocking our dead grandmother or a living grandmother. Believe me, your dead grandmother will stay dead no matter how you might shock her. It won't bring her back to life. So if you say rude things in your book, it's okay, right? You can't be humorous without saying rude things in your book. I have had the experience of having my sister get up at a meeting at Columbia University where all these scholars from all over the world were anointing Fear of Flying as a classic. And my sister got up and said, Erica Jong has ruined my life with her books. And I love her very much, but she has ruined my life. So I sort of sat there in the audience. There were all these scholars, who were giving papers. And a journalist came up to me afterwards and said, how does it feel to have your sister say that at a gathering of scholars? And I said, what can I tell you? I mean, what can I tell you? Every family has insane members, and, and so does mine. So, and by the way, I've made peace with my sister. I talk to her, she talks to me, she's apologized, and she's my sister. And she felt worse about it in a way than I did, because at least I got a laugh out of it, So you are not going to please people by censoring yourself. you're only going to displease yourself. I think it was Amanda Palmer who said, "No one truly interesting is universally liked." It's true. Okay. How do you get rid of self-censorship when you're writing? Well, for me, it's always been, I tell myself, nobody's ever going to read this. I still do that. I say, nobody's ever going to read this. Publishing is in shambles. When I was writing my current book, Fear of Dying, I thought, publishing is in shambles. They don't want writers like me. I'm not Danielle Steele. I'm not, John Grisham. They won't give me any money. They probably won't publish it. And I really believed it as I was writing it. And I was truly amazed when I got a publisher for it. So that's one thing that I do. How do you write about sex when sex is so hard to write about? Let's look at this. Sex is funny. Sex can be disastrous. Sex can be absurd. Sex can make you look your worst. It can also be transcendent and ecstatic. And the interesting thing about life is that it is both. And I've always thought that if you don't write about sex humorously, there's no way to write about sex. You go to bed with this person who you think is the most gorgeous hunk you've ever met. And he's beautiful, and he has these huge brown eyes and blue eyes or whatever. And you get into bed with this person, and disaster ensues. It could be impotence. It could be, God only knows. It could be he starts weeping about his wife in another city. Any number of terrible things can happen. There's the same beautiful face, the same lust that you felt before, but there you are in bed with somebody, and it's not fun. That's interesting to me, actually. It's far more interesting than, holy cow! Have you ever noted that as Anastasia Steele says holy cow or holy shit whenever she comes? I do not believe there's a person on the planet who has done that, but what do I know? Okay. So you can write about sex if you realize that sex is part of life, that sometimes it's wonderful and sometimes it's terrible, and that it betrays who you are inside completely, and that you can't escape from self-revelation when you take off your clothes with another person. If you remember that, it's easy to write about sex. How do you write about your family? I have one rule about that. Never show any member of your family what you're writing if you want to finish the book. I always tell writing students that. You want to finish the book, don't show it. If you show it, you'll never finish the book. Okay. I've had people get mad that they weren't in my books, and I've had people get mad that they were. You never know. I've written about people and they didn't recognize themselves in my books, and I've written about them, about other people, and they did recognize themselves. I mean, people look at my books and they say, that was me, and they go to cocktail parties and boast about it, and I hear about it and I think, I don't even know this person. So whatever, they always get it wrong. Okay. So, but it's okay. Your family will denounce you. Your children will not want to talk to you. Children are another story, different from siblings and parents. My mother used to say to me, your novels are my obituary, stick to poetry. I had a very critical mother. I gave up painting because of my mother. Many things. But let's just say that she was not a great fan of my novels. Children are another story. John Updike says somewhere that children do not want you to be a writer. Children want you to be their parent. They do not want to read your books. My daughter, I believe, has never read any of my books, which doesn't prevent her from having opinions about them, okay? She has a lot of opinions about them, but her opinions mostly come from all the people who attacked me in reviews. I don't care at this point in my life. I love her. She's my daughter. I feel very, very close to her. We've struggled and struggled to have a good relationship. And you know what? I don't need her to be my reader. So when people say to me, I can't write, I published an anthology about sexuality a few years ago called Sugar in My Bowl. And several of the women demurred at participating. And they said, I cannot participate in your anthology. What if my children or my significant other finds out? And I say, look, your children don't want you to be a writer. Your children want you to be their mother. So forget that. If you have a significant other who's going to drop you because you write a sexual story, then you have the wrong significant other, and the sooner you find out about it, the better. Which seems like a very cruel thing to say, but it is true. Anyway, the other thing about family is they may hate your books, they may hate your writing, they may think that you're writing their obituary, but once you're famous, it doesn't matter. Because they will drop your name, dine out, get table reservations with it, whatever. And they still do not like you that much. And they will say so at family gatherings. But rarely do they go public with it if your name is known. Okay. Then the other thing that I wanted to say is, I've already said, tell your truth, not the world's. The world already has its truth. Nothing, to my mind, is more boring than conventional wisdom, or CW. You can get CW on Meet the Press. You can get CW on any punditry show on television. That is not what you want. You want the inexplicable, the original. In French, novel comes from nouvelle, which means news. We love novels that tell us something we didn't know before. If you know something people didn't know before and you can write about it vividly, it's the best thing in the world. Think about Cheryl Strayed's book, which has recently been made into a rather good movie, Wild. Her mother dies at 40-something. Her mother is the love of her life. She's beside herself, Cheryl is. She doesn't know what to do. So though not a hiker, she decides to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. Her feet are bloody, her backpack is too big, everything is wrong. But she makes up her mind she's going to do this. And in the process of this hike, by this non-hiker with bloody feet, who's wearing the wrong shoes and carrying the wrong pack, she learns about herself and her mother, and she mourns her mother's death. I mean, that's a short précis of the book. But on the journey in the book, she discovers things about herself that she could have discovered no other way. That's news, okay? If you write something that is new and true, that's news. If you write about a place and a time that we didn't know before, that's news. Let's say you've always been obsessed with perfume and the people who make perfume, and you write a historical novel about a man who's a nose, right? Perfume by, what is his name? Susskind. If you tell people something about that they didn't know before, about what it means to be possessed of a nose that can smell the different flowers, the different smells in the street. People get excited. It's news, right? So what you want to do with your writing is write about something where you know it in a way other people don't know it. And that always excites readers. You want news. The novel is news. The novel and the memoir have merged in our age. It was predicted by many people. It was predicted by Thoreau. It was predicted by Henry Miller, who said, all writing is autobiography and all autobiography is writing. Virginia Woolf said something similar in her time. I'm sure many writers have said it. But basically what you're talking about is the essence that is only you, that is not anybody else. And if you can find that and find what's new about that, people want to know it. They want to hear it. And that is what a writer does, really. Doesn't matter if you call it a memoir. It doesn't matter if you call it a novel. I think all of those things all those genres are just for librarians, basically. Where do I put the book? When you're writing, you don't think about that. You think, I have to tell this story. I believe that writing is heroism of a sort. Bearing witness, telling what you need to tell. Was it, Harper Lee said, I would advise anyone who aspires to a writing career that before developing his talent, he would be wise to develop a thick hide. You don't have it when you start. There's no way you can have it when you start. You care about what everybody says, about everything you say, everything you write. But in the course of 40 years of writing, you do develop a thicker hide. You do. And you realize that sometimes attacks are compliments. And sometimes they prove that you're doing something new. George Bernard Shaw said, I finished my first book 76 years ago. I offered it to every publisher on the English-speaking earth I had ever heard of. Their refusals were unanimous. And I did not get anything into print until 50 years later, when publishers would publish anything that had my name on it. That's George Bernard Shaw, who also said, there's one good thing about being famous, and that is people sometimes do not cash your checks. Margaret Atwood said, publishing a book is like stuffing a note into a bottle and hurling it into the sea. Some bottles drown, some come safe to land, where the notes are read and then possibly cherished, or else misinterpreted, or else misunderstood, or else understood all too well by those who hate the message. You never know who your readers might be. And that is true. Peggy Atwood and I were contemporaries in the world of poetry. We were both writing poetry, and then we both wrote novels. I don't see her as much as I used to, but she's extraordinary. I would suggest that you let the story come out in your purest form. And the best writing advice I ever got from anybody was, keep on going forward, don't look back. I showed Fear of Flying to a friend of mine who was then the editor of Foreign Affairs magazine. He was a historian and a journalist and a professor. He read the first 300 pages, and he said, my advice to you is don't look back, finish the story. And it is very good advice, because if you start copy editing on the first few paragraphs, you'll never finish the book. There's a character in one of Camus' novels who keeps rewriting the first paragraph over. And, oh, is it the first sentence? Yeah.
Lady runs through the garden.
Right.
Just 5 words or so, and he
right.
spends the entire life on that one sentence.
On that one sentence. Don't be like that character of Camus. Right? Just get it out. You can rewrite, you can copy edit, you can cut, you can criticize. Get the story out. I have to say that was the best piece of advice I ever received. What else? Okay. Salinger, A Very Strange Man. What really knocks me out is a book that when you're done reading it, you wish the author that wrote it was a terrific friend of yours and you could call him up on the phone. This is actually Holden Caulfield. Whenever you felt like it, that doesn't happen much, though. That's Holden Caulfield. When I was a little girl and I read a book I loved, I would kiss the picture of the author on the back of the book. And then my mother would come in the room and I'd say, I just read this book and this is the woman who wrote it. And my mother would say, she's dead. Always the depressive, my mother. Okay. And then I would think, how amazing that a person who's dead could have moved me so deeply. And that was what I took away from Little Women, Winnie the Pooh, The House at Pooh Corner, whatever. I don't even know. Those were some of my early loves. There you are, and somebody has touched you, has moved you, and then you discover the person has passed, in that horrible euphemism we use. I would like to say died, okay? But, and yet this soul that wrote the book has changed you inside. That's why I wanted to be a writer. And that's why I still want to be a writer. For the possibility, slight as it is, that you could get into somebody's heart and change something in their heart. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And you never quite know if you're doing it. But that's why I wanted to be a writer, and that's why, for me, writing is the most important thing. When I am sitting and working and I'm truly engaged, time disappears. Death disappears. All the struggles of my life disappear, and I feel like I am doing what I was put on earth to do. A sense of wholeness, of completeness, of, this is why I'm here. If you find that in yourself, if you find the reason why you're a living, breathing, mortal, stumbling human being, hold on to it. It is what makes life transcendent. It is what makes life worthwhile. And I feel extremely blessed that I found that thing. I found it very young. I made enough money from it to be able to go on doing it. When I was at Barnard, I won a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship. I was a greasy grind and an A student and that sort of thing, and cum laude and Phi Beta and all that. But, and I was committed to be a college teacher because I won this Woodrow Wilson Fellowship. And I went to Columbia Graduate School, and I studied 18th century satire, which I adored, Swift and Pope and all the great satirists. And I discovered I loathed graduate school. I hated graduate school. Everything we read was a book about a book about a book. There weren't any real books. They were all books about books about books. And I was there in the era of Lionel Trilling, who never looked a girl in the eye, or a woman in the eye. He only talked to boys, guys. And if you were, I came from Barnard, where women were treasured. But there we were, and they never looked at the girls. And they never said a nice word to the girls because there weren't any professors at Columbia University who were girls. Carolyn Hobron told them where to get off at one point. But let's just say I hated graduate school. I loathed it. And eventually I dropped out of graduate school, having finished a lot of coursework and all of that. And I married someone. I married a psychiatrist because my first husband was schizophrenic, and I figured that would help. And he was drafted into the medical corps of the U.S. Army, and we went to Heidelberg, Germany, and I wrote Fear of Flying. I began it there. I wrote it all through my 20s, but I did a lot of the work there. And I'm so happy I didn't finish my PhD at Columbia. All the people who were Woodrow Wilson Fellows with me are out of work. So you never know what the future will bring. Somebody said to me at a dinner party the other day, all our children do things that didn't exist when we were young. And I thought, that is true. The world changes very fast. So you might as well do what you love. That's my message to you. Thank you so much.